The cell that breaks men. A man sits in silence. His hands twitch. His eyes dart back and forth at the same 4 gray walls he's been staring at for years. No TV. No contact. No freedom. Just him and the echo of his own breath. Suddenly, the steel door slams open. Guards in black uniforms rush in, fully armored, like they're heading into a war zone. The man doesn't fight. He can't. He's already broken. This isn't just a prison cell. It's a box designed to crush the strongest minds in America. And this place? It's called ADX Florence, but the world knows it as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The question is, what makes this prison so terrifying that even the toughest criminals never try to escape? The prison no one leaves. ADX Florence was built in the remote mountains of Colorado, surrounded by desert plains and razor wire. It's a fortress sitting in the middle of nowhere. Imagine Alcatraz Island, isolated by water, but swap the ocean for mountains and sand. That's why they gave it the nickname. Every cell is built like a concrete vault. The doors are thick steel. The windows are so small you can't even see the sky. Prisoners spend 23 hours a day locked inside, with just 1 hour in a tiny cage outside, where the walls are so high you can't see the horizon. But here's the shocking part. This prison holds the most dangerous people in America. Terrorists, mafia bosses, drug lords, gang leaders, and even men who once tried to escape from other prisons. ADX is where they all end up when nowhere else can contain them. Still, one question remains. If they're locked down this hard, what happens when someone does try to test the system? The silent routine. Life inside ADX is a routine of silence. Guards deliver meals through slots in the door. Prisoners never eat together, never talk face-to-face, and never touch another person. Even phone calls are rare and heavily monitored. At first, some inmates think they can handle it. After all, they've already lived through rough prisons. But ADX isn't like any other prison. Psychologists call it clean torture. It's not the beatings, not the riots, not the gangs. It's the isolation. Men who once ruled the streets now talk to themselves, pace in circles, or scream at the walls. And here's the chilling twist. Many who thought they were unbreakable eventually crack. Some beg to be transferred out. Others don't make it at all. But the silence doesn't always last. Sometimes it explodes when violence still finds a way. Even in the most secure prison in America, danger creeps in. Guards move in teams, always ready for a fight. Prisoners are searched constantly, yet contraband still appears. Sharpened metal, hidden notes, makeshift weapons. One day, an inmate launches himself at a guard during a single hour of outdoor time. The attack is quick, shocking, and violent. But here's what makes ADX different. Within seconds, alarms blare, armed officers swarm, and the prisoner is dragged away in shackles. There's no escape, no chaos spreading to the yard like in other prisons. At ADX, violence ends almost as soon as it begins. And yet the prison has one weakness. Not the walls, not the guards, not the cameras. But something hidden deep inside the minds of the men trapped here. The mind becomes escape. Inmates who can't break the walls try to break reality instead. Some create entire worlds in their heads. Imaginary families, dream homes, even conversations with people who don't exist. For them, it's the only way to survive years, sometimes decades, with no human contact. Others write letters that may never be answered, or draw on scraps of paper with whatever they can find. A few even convince themselves they'll find a way out. But here's the truth. No one has ever successfully escaped ADX Florence. The design makes it impossible. Motion detectors, guard towers, steel doors, and layers of fences stand in the way. It's the reason the prison is known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The inmate who tested the system. His name was Thomas Silverstein. If you've ever heard whispers about the most dangerous inmate in America, that was him. A man with a long record of violence inside the prison system. He'd already spent decades in solitary before arriving at ADX Florence. Guards knew his reputation. He had killed inside prison walls before, and they feared he might do it again. So, when he was moved to ADX, they didn't just lock him down like the others. They designed an entire special cell just for him, one of the most secure in the entire world. Imagine a room where every corner is rounded so nothing can be hidden. A cell where the bed, desk, and stool aren't even furniture. There's solid concrete built into the floor. He couldn't break them, couldn't move them, couldn't use them as weapons. But Silverstein still tested the system in ways no one expected. And what happened next left the whole prison on edge. A life in permanent lockdown. Silverstein's cell became a symbol of ADX itself. He wasn't allowed contact with other inmates, ever. Guards communicated with him only through thick glass or metal doors. He was trapped in silence more extreme than anyone else in the prison. At first, officials thought this would finally contain him. But then they realized something chilling. Silverstein wasn't just surviving. He was enduring. He painted. He drew. He wrote. He even gave interviews through letters, describing the crushing loneliness of his cage. He said ADX was worse than death, that living without human contact was the harshest punishment of all. And he wasn't the only one who felt that way. Other inmates began to show signs of psychological collapse. Some refused food. Others screamed endlessly. The guards knew. The walls were holding the bodies, but the minds inside were slowly unraveling. The day's silence broke. One morning, a guard making rounds heard something unusual coming from Silverstein's wing. It wasn't shouting, and it wasn't banging on the walls. It was laughter. For days, Silverstein had been talking, sometimes yelling, into the empty air. But this time, he was laughing like he was with someone else. Except no one was there. Word spread quickly among staff. Some said Silverstein had finally cracked. Others whispered that he had escaped. Not through the steel doors, but into his own mind. And that was something the prison couldn't stop. That moment raised a terrifying question. If ADX was supposed to be escape-proof, but men were still slipping away in their minds, had the prison truly done its job, or had it gone too far? The Alcatraz of the Rockies. This is why ADX earned its name. Just like the original Alcatraz, no one leaves. No one breaks free. The difference is, back in San Francisco Bay, prisoners tried. They built rafts, dug tunnels, risked everything. But at ADX Florence, escape isn't even an option. The prison doesn't just lock up bodies. It buries hope. And yet, stories keep emerging. Guards whisper about the men who talk to ghosts in their cells. Former inmates warn that the silence is more dangerous than any weapon. And families outside beg to know whether their loved ones are even the same people after years inside. The Alcatraz of the Rockies doesn't just hold America's most feared criminals. It holds their mind hostage. The desperation inside. It started with whispers. Guards noticed one inmate behaving strangely. Calm on the outside, but his eyes told a different story. He had been in ADX for years, locked in a cell smaller than most bathrooms. Every day was the same. Steel door, food tray, silence. But then he began refusing meals. He stopped speaking altogether. Instead, he scribbled on scraps of paper, messages that made no sense, drawings of broken locks, and words like freedom scrawled over and over. Staff worried. Was this a mental breakdown or something more dangerous? The 1 hour of freedom. Remember, every prisoner at ADX gets 1 hour outside each day. Not in a real yard, not with other inmates, but in a small cage with walls, so high you can't see beyond the sky. On this day, the inmate walked into the cage as usual, but then he did something unexpected. Instead of pacing in circles like always, he stood still, silent, watching. The guard monitoring him thought little of it. But what happened next would send alarms echoing through the entire facility. The sudden move. In a flash, the inmate hurled himself at the wall, using his body like a battering ram. The sound of bone against concrete echoed, blood smeared, but he didn't stop. He slammed again and again, as if he believed sheer desperation could break what thousands of pounds of steel and stone were built to contain. Alarms blared. Armed officers stormed the cage. In seconds, the man was pinned, restrained, and dragged back to his cell. He never made it past the first wall. But the message was clear. Inside ADX, some men will risk everything, even their own lives, to fight the walls that hold them. Why they call it Alcatraz of the Rockies. That incident proved something chilling. ADX isn't just about security. It's about breaking the will to even try. Unlike Alcatraz, where men dreamed of rafts and tunnels, here the prison itself becomes part of the battle. The mountains, the desert, the endless silence. All of it reminds inmates that escape is impossible. But there's still a haunting question. If the body can't escape, how long before the mind gives up too? And in that fragile space between body and mind, some of the darkest stories in American prison history are born. The mind on trial. As more years passed, word about ADX Florence began to spread beyond its walls. Lawyers, journalists, and even former prison officials started asking a dangerous question. Was this prison going too far? It wasn't about the bars or the towers or the motion sensors. It was about what the silence was doing to the men inside. Reports surfaced of inmates pacing in endless circles, screaming at night, or even harming themselves just to feel something. One lawsuit described ADX not as a prison, but as a place designed to erase a man's humanity. Families of inmates said their loved ones weren't the same anymore, that the person who went in never came out. And for the first time, the fortress known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies wasn't being tested by an escape attempt, but by the truth of its own design. The government's defense. In courtrooms, the government argued back. They said ADX wasn't torture, it was necessity. These were men who had killed guards, organized gangs, or plotted attacks even while behind bars. If anywhere could keep the public safe, it was ADX. Officials pointed to its perfect record. 0 successful escapes. Not one inmate had ever made it past those walls. Compared to Alcatraz, where men vanished into bay, ADX stood undefeated. But critics didn't let up. They asked, what's the price of safety? Is it worth breaking minds forever? And behind the courtroom battles, inside those tiny cells, inmates continue to live out the question in real time. The breaking point. Then came a case that would shake the prison's reputation even further. An inmate, long isolated and mentally ill, had been begging for help. Instead, he was left in silence. Days later, he was gone, taken by the very loneliness that ADX thrived on. The story hit headlines. The public was stunned. How could the most secure prison in America, the so-called escape-proof fortress, be brought down not by an outside force, but by what was happening inside its walls? That's when ADX Florence truly earned its haunting title. Not just the Alcatraz of the Rockies, but the place where men could disappear without ever leaving their cells. The question that remains. And so the legend of ADX Florence lives on. Some call it justice. Some call it survival. Others call it something darker. But one thing is certain. This prison doesn't just hold bodies. It holds secrets. And the scariest part is we may never know all of them. Because in the desert mountains of Colorado, the walls don't just keep inmates in, they keep the truth out. The ghosts of Alcatraz versus the monsters of ADX. Alcatraz once held bank robbers, mobsters, and men who became legends for trying to swim across the bay. But ADX Florence? It doesn't hold legends. It holds monsters. Some of the names locked behind its walls are known around the world. The Boston Marathon bomber, cartel boss El Chapo, the Unabomber, and leaders of international terrorist groups. When they arrive at ADX, there are no headlines, no photos, no interviews. They disappear into silence, swallowed by the fortress. And for years, sometimes decades, the public forgets they're even alive. That's the difference between Alcatraz and ADX. One created famous escape attempts. The other erases men from existence. The Arrival of El Chapo. When Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, one of the most powerful drug lords in history, was sentenced to life in prison, people wondered, could he escape again? After all, El Chapo had done it before, digging elaborate tunnels, bribing guards, even slipping out through shower drains in Mexico. He had embarrassed governments. He had turned prison into a joke. But when he landed in ADX Florence in 2019, everything changed. No tunnels, no bribes, no guards to turn. At ADX, El Chapo was just another number. His cell, a concrete box. His power, stripped away. Mexican officials once called him the Houdini of prison. But in ADX, even Houdini couldn't break free. And yet, the guards kept a close eye. Because if anyone were desperate enough to try, it was him, the mind of the Unabomber. Then there was Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, a man who once waged war against modern technology, living in a shack, sending bombs through the mail. When he arrived at ADX, he spent years in silence, writing letters to the outside. Some described his cell as a concrete tomb. But unlike others Kaczynski adapted, he wrote manifestos, answered fan mail, and survived until 2023, when his story finally ended behind those walls. His death didn't come from escape or violence. It came from the weight of time itself. And in ADX, time is the harshest punishment of all. The youngest face of terror, one of the most chilling inmates locked away, is Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber. Only a teenager when he committed his crime, he now lives in the same silence as men decades older. Imagine being 19, suddenly stripped of everything, placed into a cage where the days blur together for life. No crowds, no headlines, just the sound of guards' boots echoing down a hallway. For him, ADX isn't just a prison. It's a reminder that his story ended the moment those gates closed behind him. The perfect machine. ADX Florence isn't a normal prison. It's a machine. Every movement is calculated. Every sound is monitored. Every wall, every door, every fence was designed with one goal: to crush hope. The showers? Inside the cell. The bed? Made of concrete. The windows? Too small to see out. The recreation yard? A concrete cage. There's no place to run, no place to hide, and no way to escape. Not physically and not mentally, unless your mind finds its own dark exit. That's why experts say ADX is more than a prison. It's a test. And only two things can happen: you endure or you break. The lawsuit that exposed the truth. In 2012, former inmates filed a lawsuit claiming ADX wasn't just secure, it was cruel. They described men losing their grip on reality, hallucinating, hearing voices. They said prison officials ignored mental illness, leaving some to self-destruct. The lawsuit made headlines. Suddenly, the public wasn't just asking if ADX could stop escape attempts. They were asking if it was destroying human beings. The government defended it. Of course. They said ADX was necessary to protect society. But the lawsuit cracked open the truth. Maybe this place didn't just hold the worst of the worst. Maybe it was also a place where people slowly lost themselves. The forgotten prisoners. Not every man inside ADX is a famous name. Many are forgotten. Men who once ruled gangs, led violent uprisings, or killed behind bars. One prisoner spent years without ever seeing another human face. His food sliding through a slot, his world shrinking smaller each day. Another begged to be moved out, claiming the silence was driving him insane. His letters were filled with desperate words. This is not living. This is dying slowly. Their stories don't make the news. But inside ADX, those stories are everywhere. The question of justice. And so, the debate rages on. Is ADX Florence the ultimate symbol of justice? Proof that no one is above the law, no matter how powerful? Or is it something darker? A place where men don't just lose their freedom, but their very sense of being alive? Every cell is a cage. Every day is the same. Every moment is a reminder. There is no escape. That's why they call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Not because it's surrounded by water, but because it's surrounded by something stronger. Walls, silence, and despair. The secret no one talks about. Here's the most haunting part. Officials admit ADX has no escape record. Zero. But they rarely talk about the escapes that happen inside the mind. For some men, their imagination becomes their only way out. Others lose themselves completely, leaving behind broken shells of who they once were. The truth is, ADX doesn't need to stop escapes, because it already has. It kills the very thought of freedom. And maybe that's the real reason it earned its title. The Alcatraz of the Rockies, the escape rumors no one believes. On paper, ADX Florence is escape-proof. No inmate has ever made it out. But that doesn't mean men haven't tried. Whispers circulate about hidden plans. Prisoners who claim to have dug into the walls with makeshift tools. Others who said they studied guard patterns for years, hoping for the smallest slip. One inmate even wrote a letter describing a plan to stage a fake medical emergency, hoping to ambush staff during a hospital transfer. but the system is built too tight. Transfers involve armed convoys, helicopters on standby, and federal marshals waiting at every stop. Every plan ends the same way, in chains. At ADX, rumors of escape aren't act of hope. They're proof of desperation, a guard's view from the inside. Life for the guards at ADX is just as unique as it is for the inmates. Imagine walking a hallway where every door hides someone who would kill you if given the chance. Imagine knowing you can never let your guard down, not for a second. Officers move in teams of 3 or 4. They wear body armor, even to deliver food. Every interaction is controlled, rehearsed, and monitored by cameras. One retired guard admitted, "At ADX, you don't just watch prisoners, you watch the silence. The moment it breaks, something's about to happen. But the silence isn't only dangerous for inmates. It weighs on staff, too. Some guards describe the atmosphere as heavy, suffocating, like the walls themselves are alive. Few last a full career inside the fortress. Many transfer out after just a few years. A prison built on fear. Unlike Alcatraz, where guards and inmates mingled in yards and dining halls, ADX separates everything. The design isn't just about bricks and steel, it's about psychology. The message is clear from the first day. There's no way out. The architecture itself is a weapon. Long hallways, soundproof cells, and layers of locked gates make the prison feel endless. Even if a prisoner somehow made it through one door, 10 more would be waiting. Fear becomes part of the air. Prisoners fear the silence. Guards fear the men they oversee. Families fear what's happening to their loved ones behind the walls. And the public fears what would happen if ADX didn't exist. The ghosts of Alcatraz return. In the 1960s, 3 men famously escaped Alcatraz Island. Their bodies were never found. To this day, people argue, did they drown in the bay or did they make it? But if those same men were alive today and sent to ADX Florence, the story would be different. There would be no rafts, no tunnels, no mystery. The mountains, the fences, the cameras, they would all crush the idea before it began. The legend of Alcatraz was built on escape attempts. The legend of ADX is built on their impossibility. The prison of the century. ADX Florence is often called the prison of the century, not because it's the largest or the bloodiest, but because it redefined what prison means. It's not about rehabilitation. It's not about second chances. It's about finality. When you arrive at ADX, your life as you knew it is over. No more choices. No more freedom. Just silence, steel, and time. And yet, despite its walls, ADX has become a mirror of society's darkest fears. It holds not just criminals, but the question of how far justice should go. Inside the concrete tombs. Step inside a typical ADX cell, and you'll see why it's called a tomb. The bed is a slab of concrete. The desk and stool, also concrete. The toilet has no removable parts. The sink is built into the wall. The window is 4 inches wide, angled so you can only see the sky, not the horizon, not freedom. It's a space designed to erase humanity. Guards have said it feels more like a morgue than a prison block. And that's the point. The prison that breaks minds. Experts say the real danger at ADX isn't riots, gangs, or violence. It's the slow burn of isolation. One former inmate described it this way. Your mind eats itself. First you talk to yourself. Then you talk to the walls. Eventually, the walls talk back. Psychologists who studied ADX reported high rates of hallucinations, paranoia, and self-harm. Men who once commanded armies on the streets now crumble under the weight of silence. This is why some call ADX the cleanest torture chamber in the world. A place even criminals fear. Here's the most telling fact. Even inside prison, ADX Florence has a reputation. Inmates locked up in other facilities warn each other. Don't end up in Florence. Why? Because even the toughest men, the ones who survive gang wars, shootouts, and decade behind bars, admit that ADX is different. It's not just about being locked up. It's about being erased. The last stop. For many prisoners, ADX is the last stop on the line. There's no transfer after this, no better behavior deal, no moving down the security levels. Once you're here, you stay here, sometimes until death. That's why they call it life after life. Even when a sentence ends, The prison doesn't let go. For some, parole hearings never come. For others, appeals drag on for years with no result. And so the prison becomes a graveyard of the living, the question of escape. And still, the question lingers. Can anyone ever escape? Security experts say no. The prison is layered like a maze. Beyond the cells are steel doors. Beyond those doors are armed towers. Beyond the towers are fences topped with razor wire. And beyond all of that, the Rocky Mountains stretch for miles in every direction. Even if someone somehow slipped past everything inside, they'd face nature itself. The freezing nights, the blazing days, and a desert where survival is impossible without help. So maybe ADX doesn't just lock men in. Maybe the mountains themselves are part of the prison. The real Alcatraz of the Rockies. Alcatraz was feared because it was isolated by water. ADX Florence is feared because it's isolated by silence. At Alcatraz, prisoners plotted to swim for their lives. At ADX, prisoners plot just to stay sane. One prison was a cage of water. The other is a cage of the mind. And that's why ADX Florence isn't just compared to Alcatraz. It has surpassed it. It has become the ultimate symbol of confinement in America, the prison that buries hope. So why do they call ADX Florence the Alcatraz of the Rockies? It isn't just the walls of steel and stone. It isn't just the guards and armor, or the desert that stretches for miles. It's because once you enter this place, you don't just lose your freedom, you lose yourself. Alcatraz was about daring escapes, about men willing to risk their lives for one last chance at freedom. But ADX? It's about the opposite. Here, the walls don't inspire escape. They crush the very thought of it. Inside these concrete tombs, some of the most notorious names in history sit in silence, erased from the world. Their stories don't end with dramatic breakouts or riots. They end with whispers, with broken minds, with men disappearing into shadows of their own thoughts. In the end, ADX Florence isn't just a prison. It's a statement, a warning, a reminder that there are places built not to punish the body, but to bury the spirit. And maybe that's the most terrifying truth of all. At Alcatraz, men tried to escape. At ADX Florence, they don't even try.